In this video, I'll be going over the basic features of LynnaLab. First, I just wanted to mention that we have a Discord, and you can go over there to ask for help or show off any project you're working on. Put a link to that in the description. Anyway, let's just jump right into it. So obviously, you'll notice this very quickly. Just to use the room editor, you just click here to select a tile, and then draw. You can also right-click. So right-click to select a tile in here. Right-click, right-click. Very simple. Now to get into the room properties here. First of all, notice there's a cache sign here. This means it's hexadecimal. If you were to type a number in just decimal, so like 17 decimal, press enter, it gets converted to hexadecimal, which is 1 in hexadecimal. I might actually change that because there's usually no point in entering in decimal at all, so I might just change it to always be hexadecimal. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway. You'll notice very quickly that this and these are the same thing. Modify one and you'll affect the other. And of course, this is music. This sets what music will play in this room. So, I want to play Onyx Castle music. Is that even? I'm not sure if that's even in Ages, but anyway, you can select the music to play here. Onyx Castle, underwater music. You can play whatever you want here. This question mark, you'll see this a number of times. You can click on the question mark to get documentation. In this case, it's just a list of possible values. It also has sound effects. There's no point in actually having these sound effects here. I might remove those later. Anyway, next is the tile set. You can modify this to set tile set, and you can also edit. I'll get into the editing later. Room pack. This has a tooltip which basically documents it. Essentially, in seasons, this is used to force the season to be reloaded when you change between certain rooms. In Ages, it's almost never used. The only two places it's used are Maku Tree. So here it has a value of 80, and also Companion Regions. This has a value of 7F. It just, in the Companion Regions, this is just a special thing which causes some special code to run, which will change which tile set loads. So for example, tileset D here changes to E. It becomes Dimitri's room. It changes to F, it becomes Moosh's room. And room pack 7F will cause the tileset to automatically change. So that's what this does. GFX load after transition. So checking this will cause the tileset graphics to load after you fully transition instead of before you fully transition. So for example, here this room is tileset 3. Here this room is tileset 0. Now, there's no real difference in, like, we could set this to 3 and it would make no difference. Same here, we could set this to 3. We could set this to 0 and it makes no difference, but suppose we put this tree here. Now, if we set this to 0, now it does make a big difference because this tree isn't rendered properly anymore. And that will be a problem because, okay, say this is not checked. So when you enter this room, the graphics will load before the transition. That's a problem because when we transition from here, we walk off the screen to the left here. What that will do is it will load tileset 0 before the screen begins to scroll, which means this is what we'll see. If you want to avoid that, what we do is we go to this room and we check GFX load after transition. And that will prevent this issue from occurring. Okay, now objects. Let's go here. Let's go here. Okay, so there are several types of objects, and they each have different color code. So this is orange. I call this interaction object. So you can select which type of object it is by going here, and like there's a huge list here. You can also click on the question mark. This is not only a list, it also has some documentation. Like this, it's a lot. Like this was a lot of work. Anyway, so you can click here, change what it is, change this to a great fairy if you want. You can do whatever you want. So that's the ID. Again, this is the same as this. These are the same field. Change one and you change the other. Sub ID. Now this. Let's see. Okay, this is a good example. So for this fairy object, there are two sub-ID values. 0 is a linked game in the fairy's woods. 1 is a cutscene after being healed, like on the way to Dungeon 7. So sub-ID is like, it's the same object, but there's different variations of the object. And look, even the color changes slightly. This one is orange, this one is red. And these are invalid. Looks like these are not correct at all. So only 6 is already 0 and 1 looks like this one. X and Y, you can just click and drag to change the X and Y values. If you look here, they change as it's being dragged. You'll notice though that like it's snapping to multiples of 8. In hexadecimal, like even 30, this is a multiple of 8 in hexadecimal. It's snapping to multiples of 8. And if you hold Control, you can give it a fine-grained position. When you let go, it'll snap to wherever it is now. So now it's slightly misaligned. Like I normally like to, most objects are like to be in like increments of 8 pixels. So we can just modify this directly, change this to multiple of 8, and here we go. It's aligned again. var3, this usually does nothing. But if you look at the documentation for the particular object, sometimes it'll say var03 does this, var03 does that. And in that case, you might want to set this to a specific value. But in this case, it does nothing. And in most cases, it'll do nothing. So usually, you just don't need to worry about it. Okay, let's go to an enemy object. So let's say this crow. Again, it's got ID. It's got sub-ID. Again, 2 types of crows. This is the type of crow which stays perched in one area. WD1 is a different type of crow which spawns from outside the screen. X and Y, same thing. Of course, we've got the list of IDs here. This is different, of course. This is enemy IDs. Last one was interaction IDs, which was a different type of object. In addition, we have these 2 checkboxes here. Now, respawn. This is pretty self-explanatory with this tooltip. Even if you kill the enemy, after you exit and re-enter the room, the enemy will always respawn, if this is checked. Uncounted, this is a bit weirder. So, there's an enemy called wnum enemies, which as you can see here, wnum enemies. This is used for puzzles. And generally when you kill all enemies, something will happen, like a chest will appear or something. And, however, there's a way to make enemies uncounted, like not count towards that. And to that you just click this checkbox. It's not that simple though, because there's an asymmetry. If you select an enemy as uncounted, that means when it spawns, it will not increment the number of enemies. But when you kill it, all that matters is the type of enemy it is. Like even if we check this, so it's not going to count towards the number of enemies, but this is a crow type enemy, and that means it always decrements the number of enemies after you kill it. So there's going to be a mismatch. So essentially, only specific types of enemies are supposed to have this checked. The most common example, if you go to a dungeon, these guys. These are always an uncounted type of enemy. So you should have this checked if you have a puzzle in the room which contains them. Anyway, yeah, that's enemies. This is an item drop. This is pretty simple. Select the type of item you want. Or chunks always don't exist in Aegis, but the same. But everything else exists in Aegis, like amber seeds, scent seeds. Again, here's the list of items. Respawns, same as for enemies. Just it lets you collect the item multiple times if you exit and re-enter the room. That's what the respawn bit does. Now, if you want to add more, right click. Got all these types here. Now let's go to random position enemy. So this is very similar to a regular enemy. It's got respawn uncounted. It's got one more, spawn anywhere, which is pretty self-explanatory again. It can spawn on walls or anywhere else, which is good for, like, say, this crow. It could spawn on walls and stuff. Quantity, set this to at least 1. If this is 0, then it'll loop back down to 16, and you'll have a lot of enemies. Yeah, that's pretty much random position enemies. Delete this. Let's add specific position enemy B. Alright, this is a type A specific position enemy. And this is type B. They're almost the same. Let's almost warrior or something. Sure. The only difference is that if you go here, it has these checkboxes, respawn, uncounted. Here, it just assumes that these are both checked. Now, type B is almost never actually used. The only reason you would use it is if you need to set var03. Again, this thing, it almost never does anything, but sometimes the documentation will say this does something, so in that case you might want to use type B, specific position enemy. Almost, you don't, generally just don't need to bother them. It doesn't really, it's not that important. Part is another type of enemy, type of object. It's a bit of a weird name, but that's kind of what we settled on. Let's go for an example in a dungeon. Here. Alright, this owl is a part type object. In addition, we go to here. Switches are generally parts. And again, we get documentation here. The button you can activate sets a certain bit in RAM, which can be used for scripts and stuff. Yeah, so those are parts. Let's go back to our original room. That's everything except conditions. Condition, I need to study this more. But essentially it can activate or deactivate objects. Actually, let's go to Jabber Jabber. So here's a good example. These conditions. Condition 2, spawn jellyfish. Condition 1, spawn the gel. So it's checking the water level in this case, but exactly what it checks is very dependent on the context. It's also used in the animal companion regions, I think. Yeah, here, condition. This is like, I don't know, maybe specifically for Ricky's room or something. Only if it's Ricky's room, spawn these enemies. Something along those lines. It's checking a variable in the disassembly. Let's go to include wram.s. Come on, don't be so slow. It's checking a variable called like a room state modifier. In seasons, that variable actually is the season. In ages, it does various different things. Yeah, there's some documentation here. The documentation isn't really that helpful, but this is what it's checking. So like, if it's value 1, then the room is in a certain state. If it's value 2, it's in a different state. So that's what the condition is used for. Lastly, you're probably wondering what these different boxes are for. So in the main object box, these objects in the main box, they always spawn. Objects in the enemy box, these only spawn when Maple does not appear. I think that's the only difference. When Maple is on screen, objects in this box don't appear. And that also applies to these bottom boxes as well. They don't spawn when Maple is there. But the real reason these bottom boxes exist is for boss rooms for the most part. You go here. So this boss spawns only before a certain event occurs. In this case, the event is obviously beating the boss. After you beat the boss, he doesn't spawn. And I believe it checks bit 7, or the highest bit of what we call the room flags. That's not important right now. I'll cover that later. And after event, this is never used in ages, I think. It is used like once in seasons, but it's just the opposite. Only spawn after an event occurs, basically. So like if we wanted to say, I don't know, let's spawn, like an example. It's not important, like spawn an orb. This will only appear after you beat the boss. When you load you have to exit and re-enter the room, it'll appear after you beat the boss. It's not very useful, but you might find some use for it. Alright, so that's objects. Actually, there's one more thing. Two more things. Alright. One thing is I want to show you where they're defined in the disassembly. So go to constants. We've got enemy types. Got enemy types, we've got part types. I'm just not seeing them. Part types.s. And we've got interaction types.s. If we open one of these, the documentation that LynnaLab shows is pulled directly from this file. Like if you like make custom objects, you can add a documentation here yourself. Like this line would be showed in LynnaLab if you access documentation. So yeah, this is just an alternate way to like see all documentation for all the objects here. So yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention, there's this kind of special case. We go to like, let's see. Here we go. All right. Yeah, this is actually going off screen now. Like the window got too big. It's because of this. It's a very weird case. So it's shared. Good data make all torches lightable. So this spawns an object, create object at each tile index, and it's not important. Basically, it doesn't actually do anything in this room. It's like, so they might have initially intended to have these torches unlit. This would have allowed you to light the torches. But it's not important. The point is, there's an extra pointer here. And if we delete this, this will affect other rooms which use this object data, because this is shared. Again, shared, big capital letters, this is shared. This is not the only room that uses this. So we can just, if we click this, then that's fine. It'll delete the reference. Other rooms can still use this and they won't be affected. But if we click this, that'll remove the reference, and the room will just work as normal but without that object. All right, I think that's everything for objects. Now, warps. Let's go to actually a fresh room. Let's go back to here. So out of the warp, you right click here, like add standard warp. Start with that. Now standard warps, they will affect all warp tiles on screen. So like this is a warp tile, this is a warp tile, this is a warp tile. All of these will trigger this warp, because this affects all warp tiles on screen. So we'll ignore these for now. These 4 checkboxes, we'll get back to them later. Let's just set the destination for this. So right click, you can follow it to go, just like jump to which room it goes to. So by default it goes to this room 0. Or we can right click and edit destination. And this is similar, except now we have this thing here, which allows us to set the destination. So we can also change the room and this will follow us. Like, let's warp to like Tokyo Island or something. Okay, when we're done setting this, we right click. And there's a message here about this. We are in warp destination editing mode. To exit this, we right click here, select done. And we've just changed the room it warps us to. Now it warps us to room CD. We just set that. Alright, source transition. Again, click here to see some documentation about this. Instant is like just you. As soon as you touch the warp, it instantly starts the warp. Fade out, there's a small fade out before you warp out. Leave screen, get to this in a second. Subrosia type warp used for Subrosia portals and seasons, not used in ages. And this is like when you fall into a hole. So like if you wanted to make a hole that warps you somewhere. Actually, it would only work in dungeons, I think. Anyway, in dungeons there are specific... I'm not sure exactly how it works, it's been a while. It's very rare to use it anyway. Anyway, as for destination, again, there's even more possibilities with destination. This destination transition, this affects the way you spawn in. So set respawn just sets your respawn point. Basic doesn't set your respawn point. Same as this. This and basic are the same. Fall will make you fall in from like top of the screen. Time warp, again, I'm not going to go over all of them. But I should go over leave screen. So, like, as it is now, we can just walk into any of these warps and it'll instantly warp us here. But if you wanted to, like, do something different, so let's say we wanted to activate a warp that occurs when we walk off the top left side of the screen. In this case, we would check this box top left that moves this warp up here. We can also do like all these and that would affect all the other corners also. So then when we walk up here and we set the source transition to leave screen, then we'll cause Link to walk off the screen and then spawn in at the destination. And it might also be the case that like you want to set the destination transition to enter screen. In this case, we should use an example. Here, destination here is enter screen, and that's because when we go here, Link walks in from off of the screen. So if we add destination, we'll see that this is in the bottom right corner of the screen. That's because we set just Y to F, just X to F, and this triggers special behavior as documented here. Enter screen. Set these both to X and Y. Set both X and Y to F to trigger special behavior, which just causes Link to walk in from the center of the screen. Yeah, so that's warps in a nutshell. Actually, we're not done. Because it's also... Because this will not work if you want multiple warps on screen. Like, let's go back here. Alright, so these all warp to the same place. How do we make them warp to different places? Oh, right, sorry, we're still in warp destination editing mode. Oops, we just modified the warp for Dungeon 1 entrance. Oh well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, if you wanted to make these warp to different places, what we would do is we would add specific position warp. First of all, we would have to delete this. Because if we had both a full screen warp and a specific position warp, this one takes precedence, and so this would not do anything. So we have to delete this. Again, multiple specific position warps, just drag them over to where you want them to be, and the rest are the same. Okay, anything else? No, that's warps. Okay, chests. So we want to add a chest here. Add in the chest in the Tileset Editor. And click add here. This will add the chest data. By default, you'll just get 1 rupee from here. Right. So we just drag this to where we want the chest to be. And then we set the treasure. So again, click on the question mark, you see the list of treasures you can get. Let's get, say, King of Samaria. Okay, we set ID 0, sub ID 0. Now, something to note here. Now this says treasure 4, sub ID 0 data. That's treasure 4, sub ID 0. We change this sub ID or this treasure ID, and everything in this box is also going to change. Here, we just switch to a sub ID that doesn't exist, just to demonstrate that most dramatically. But also if we change the ID, then also these values change because we're referencing some different data. Anyway, this is the treasure referring to a specific type of King of Samaria. In this case, it's only one type. Actually, let's change the sword so we have multiple types. So this is type 0, type 1, that's Noble Sword, type 2, Master Sword. These are some other variant, I don't know what these are. And then these don't exist. Okay, now let's say we want to get the sword from a chest. Now, first we have to check the spawn mode. The spawn mode, again, documentation here, it has to be either from chest A or from chest B. Normally you want from chest A, they're the same, just different animations. If you don't change this, then you'll soft lock when you try to open the chest. So, change this to from chest A. This, I don't think this grab mode actually does anything when it comes from a chest, but it does affect items which are not in chests. Like, for example, this sword, which normally is not in the chest. Like, normally it would just be grab it from it button, hold it over your head with one hand, or hold it over your head with 2 hands if you change it like this. But in any case, we're changing it to be in a chest, so we change it to from chest A. This item obtained flag, this is documented here. If you don't set this to checked, then you'll be able to open the chest as many times as you want, which is probably not what you want. The reason this exists, again, this is not just for chest data. Like, this box here is for treasure data, not necessarily treasure in a chest. Of course, in this context, we're only thinking about chests, but this data also applies to treasures which are not necessarily in chests. Like, obviously the sword is not in the chest normally. Parameter, in this case, this will be the sword's level, so 1, 2, 3. It doesn't change the graphics, but it does affect the level of sword you get. And of course, for something else like, say, seeds, then this would set how many seeds you get. It's context dependent. Text index, this is the text that's shown, tx00xx. So again, let's go to the disassembly folder. Go to... Let's go to... I hope your computers aren't as slow as this. Okay, let's see. Text 001C. TX001C. You got it here as wooden sword. This is the text that it'll show when you grab it. It's always 00 something. So in this case, 001C. And of course, you can either modify this text if you want, or you can just point it to some other text, like 1D if you want. And of course, graphics, you can see what it does. It changes the graphics. It's very simple. it's only graphical. It's not changing what item you get. Like, this looks like a sea tutor, but it's still a sword because everything else says it's the sword. This is just the graphics. One more thing you're going to want to note is to be careful about when you edit these fields, like everything in this box for a specific treasure sub-ID. Because let's say you want, let's go to the dungeon, let's say you want a chest with a key in it. So let's put a chest here. Let's look for the small key. Alright, small key. Let me see. Oh, this is not in a chest, so let's change this to be in a chest from chest A. No, don't do this. On this, because this treasure 30 sub-ID 00, this is used for something else. Because they're like, before it didn't matter, because like the sword, you only get the sword once, so you can change it all you want. But this, you get small keys from a lot of different places. So like, if you modify this, you're going to modify small keys from everywhere else. In this case, this is a small key that appears with a puff. Or for sub-ID 1, it's a small key that drops from the top of the screen. Sub-ID 2, it's from underwater. I don't know where that's used. I remember that being used in Seasons. I don't know if that's used in Ages. Anyway, sub-ID 3, here, use this one. This comes from a chest. This is already everything you need it to be. So just use this. Or, if you don't have a treasure that's exactly the way you want it, what you can do, create new sub-ID. Just go to sub-ID that doesn't exist, click create new sub-ID, and you can just fill in the fields however you want. So yeah, just be careful, like, because there's lots of small keys that fall from the top of the screen. You don't want to break them all. If you change this to from chest A, you're going to break all the small keys that fall from the top of the screen. So just be careful about that. Okay, next up is Tileset Editing. So let's click here. Whoops, click here to edit the tileset. So there's sort of 3 sections to this. There's this section which edits individual tiles. There's this section which is the properties of the overall properties of the tile set, and then there's the palettes over here. Let's start with the individual tiles. So let's say we wanted to like draw a new tile here. Okay, first of all, these are the these are the raw graphics, and these are the tiles. So these graphics, they're 4x4 squares, 1, 2, 3, 4 squares here, made up of these tiles. So let's make a cracked floor. I know cracked floor already exists, but let's make another one. Alright, this looks really ugly. The reason for that is because of the palette we're using. Let's change the palette. These are the palettes. So palette 0 and 1, they're like, 0 is like a default palette, which is not here. It's not here because you can't edit palette 0. Palette 0 is always red and is used on the HUD for like your hearts and stuff, so you can't edit palette 0. Palette 1, I think, is just like, I forget what palette 1 is, but it seems to be just completely black. It must be used for something, I don't remember. Anyway, palettes 2 to 7 you can control, so let's, palette 2 I think is a reasonable color for this. Let's see. Yeah, so for editing palettes, I would recommend, like, you can use the arrow keys to move this up and down, so like click, set arrow keys, click, 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 use the arrow keys to modify. I should do something similar for here. Like, select a tile, you have to click here, select tile, click here, select a tile. It's kind of annoying. I think I will make this auto increment when you select a tile. I think that's what I'll do, just to make the process more quick. Anyway, so that's creating the tile here. We've now created a new tile. We can draw it here. Oop, whoa, whoa, whoa. New tile here. It's not a real cracked floor, actually. That's more difficult to change its actual behavior. I might get into that later. The problem is, okay, I'll just give you a note. Go to this page. This is the data that determines how a tile behaves, and it's kind of complicated. I'm not gonna get into this right now. It'll take too long. But the data is here, and if you need clarification, I can always help you on the Discord. But yeah, like all these tables, like these are cliff tiles, these are tiles which you can break, stuff like that. You can't really change it in LynnaLab, it's too complicated. So the data's there. I can help you out if you need help with that. Same with cracked floors. You can't just set a floor as, you can't just set a tile as being cracked. You need to modify the data in the disassembly. Anyway, not going to worry about that. Go back to the tile editor. What we can do is we can change the solidity. So like here, we just draw on this right side, and this will change the collision, the solidity of the collision. We can change the solidity, but nothing else. Like we can't make something a door. We can't make it a cracked tile. We can make it solid, but that's all. And we can like make only the bottom. We can only make like the left half solid or the right half solid. That's the extent of control we have. We can set the collisions like this controls the collision value. You can set the collision to like 1, 0 and above. There's documentation on that here. No, there isn't. Some collisions have a value of 1, 0 or above. In that case, the documentation for that is constants / special collision values. And this is normally just for bridges, like a vertical bridge. Vertical bridge has a value of 1, 1. These are just a few special cases. There's not much here. It's not used very often. But yeah. For the most part, you don't need to worry about that at all. Just set it to any value between 0 and F to set the collisions. Subtile index, we don't, like we set that when we clicked here, like we can just modify it manually and you can see the green cursor moving. We don't need to set this manually, we can just click to set it. Palettes, we set that as well, we modified palettes. Alright, flip X, flip Y, these are pretty straightforward. Flip X, flip Y, they flip the tiles. Priority, okay. So, this, for any given palette, like this is using palette 4, this whole tile is using palette 4. So for palette 4, this is color 0, this is color 1, color 2, color 3. Color 0 will appear underneath link if priority bit is set. Color 0 appears underneath link. Colors 1 to 3 appear above link. So this has the effect of making, like, say, waterfall tiles appear above link. So you can do some layering with this. Of course, cracked tiles should not appear above link, so we'll unset this. Is there any like this? I'm not sure if there's any like this in this tile set. I don't think there would be, but you can use this to make certain things appear above link. It's all graphical, of course, it's just graphical. And I should just remove this. Like, this should always be checked. You can't even uncheck it. I disabled it. Just don't worry about that. Okay, and then let's go to the palettes. You can modify the palettes. Like, just click on one of these and like, yeah, let's change this one. A very ugly yellow. It immediately had effect in the room itself. Yeah, luckily it saves a few of the most recent palettes, so we can change it back. That's not me, that's the GTK color picker, so thank GTK for that. Something to keep in mind. Okay, let's go to a different tile set. Let's go to this one. Something to keep in mind is that palettes can be shared even when it's not expected. I changed my mind. We'll do Tileset 0. Hang on. Okay, we'll do Tileset 0. And so this has, okay, we set the palette it uses here, so these aren't even real palettes for the overworld. Okay. So we can change the palette it uses here, and that seems pretty straightforward. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that a palette data can be shared by multiple palettes. So palette 10, okay, palette data for A30. This is a label in this assembly, and you can just edit it directly. And I just have it here for reference. So for A30, let's look at some other palettes. For the most part, this is different, but we go up to like 2.1. Here it is for A30 again. So if we edit palette 10, we're also editing palette 21. So just worth keeping in mind that occasionally there can be some overlap. I think in most cases that's not really a concern, but that can happen sometimes. And if you need to undo that, then you can always edit the data directly in the disassembly. Like you can go to data/pages palette data, and if you're careful, you can edit directly. Though if you don't do it properly, you might break LynnaLab, so be careful. In any case, let's go over some other fields here. So properties, these are mostly straightforward. Properties like past, underwater, sky scrolling, straightforward. These two are a bit confusing, large indoor room and dungeon. So again, these have tooltips. So dungeon bit, always set this in a dungeon. If your room is supposed to be on the dungeon tab, then you just set it. You always set it. Actually, let me check one thing, because you can go to group 4 and see all the dungeon rooms. Oh boy, it's lagging. Okay. Let me just check if it's set here. Okay, interesting. But anyway, so I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go to a room that's actually used in a dungeon. So we set this dungeon bit. Now you set this bit if it is in one of these dungeons, but it's not a real dungeon. For example, Ambi's Palace. This is not a real dungeon, right? But it's in a dungeon map, sort of. So we would set both dungeon and large indoor room. And this disables certain properties of dungeons, like when you open the map, it doesn't open a dungeon map and things like that. Okay, so that's that. Small indoor room is set in, obviously, small indoor rooms. Stop lag. It doesn't lag like this on Linux. I hope it doesn't lag like this for you guys. Yeah, small indoor room, we set this in rooms like that. Macca outdoors, yada yada. Okay, dungeon index. This is F if it's not a dungeon. If it is a dungeon, then it should match the value in the dungeons tab. So actually, this is decimal, and this is hexadecimal. So I should really fix that. I should make them consistent. But this is 14 in decimal. So this matches this. Okay, collision type. Again, let's bring up this page. This is this collision type. 0 for the overworld, 1 for indoors, blah blah blah. I think 5 might be actually unused. 6 and 7 are definitely unused. Anyway, so if this is 2, so that means it's a dungeon room. If you set this to 1, then that'll like change all the collisions to be whatever 1 is indoors. If we change to 0, then it'll be collisions will behave as if it's outdoors. And what that means is like, so like in dungeons, then like certain tiles are holes, certain tiles are water, and etc. In the overworld, they're arranged differently, and in indoor rooms, which are not dungeons, they're arranged differently. So they all have different sort of presets for collisions, and that's what this sets. These sets what the kind of collision preset is. Palettes, we went over palettes earlier. Change that to change the palette. Layout group. Get to that in a second. That one's weird. Animations. Okay, go to View, Animations. See the animations. You can also see it in the Tileset viewer itself. So we just change the animation. And you can see like some animations are clearly not designed for this type of room, but you can change the animations to see what it looks like. And you change the value to be too high, so now they completely stopped, and this will not work in game. If you change the FF, then that's the way to disable animations. But if it's like FE or anything else, then that's just going to break the game. So we're going to have to keep it to a low value, which actually works like 10. I think this is unused, so I'm not sure what this is. Okay, let's go to layout group. Alright, this one is weird. So, layout group. So let's say, okay, we want to change the tile set for this room. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What the heck is this? Okay, the room layout completely changed. Why did that happen? Well, this is the room layout for the present underwater map. Like, let's go to group 2. Present underwater. It just loaded this from this tile data. And the reason for that is Tileset 7. Let's go to Tileset 7. Uses a different layout group. It uses layout group 1, whereas other tilesets we were going through before use layout group 0. Let's read the tooltip. Determines where to read the room layout from. So for value 2, it reads from the file room02xx.bin. Yeah, so that's where it figures out where to load the room data from. And in this case, again, let's look at this in the disassembly. It would be rooms, ages, small, room00xx. So these are all the rooms. Now, I don't know why they did it like this. It's really confusing. But each tile set determines which file to load the rooms from. So if this is 0, it loads from room, let's see. Okay, which room are we at? We're in room 4A. So if this value is 1, then it loads from room 014A. If it's 0, it loads from 004A. And now see, it's fixed now. 2024A. We can even go to like 04A, and now look, it's a dungeon layout. It's too big for the overworld. It's a mess. So like, yeah, so be careful with this. And when you change to an invalid value, like, it gives you a warning here. That's just to help you out. Like it's saying, hey, your tileset using an unexpected layout group value. So maybe you want to check that out, because this probably shouldn't be happening. Like in this case, you just want to change the tileset back to something normal. Okay, and I'm not sure if that was a satisfactory explanation. It's a bit of a confusing concept, but that's the way it is. Okay. One last note about tileset editing. So if you want to edit the actual graphics of the tileset, which I kind of forgot to mention, which is pretty important. So first look at the tileset index. This is tileset number 8. Alright, now let's go to the assembly folder again. And let's see here. Files, where is it? VFX, pages, and all tileset stuff is here. Tileset 08. I wish Windows would sort this better. Tileset 08. And all the graphics for the tileset are here. This isn't actually the way the game stores it normally. Normally what the game does is actually loads segments of the tileset independently. But to make things simpler and to make it easier to port projects from Zoll, I merged them all together so that each tileset loads from a single file. This makes it more straightforward, but it also causes a lot of data to be duplicated, and as a result the ROM is now 2 megabytes instead of 1 megabyte. But it's a lot more straightforward to modify tileset graphics this way. You can just edit this file and then rebuild, and that's how you edit the graphics. Okay, we got one more subject for this video, and that is dungeon editing. So, the edit in Dungeon Editor, Maple Editor I'm not going to cover, it's pretty simple. Dungeon Editor. So, let's go to Dungeon 1. Let's also open it in this Dungeon tab. Alright. Now, the most part is pretty simple. It's like, so, first of all, note that all these rooms outside the dungeon, they're the same room, room 0. Like if we edited room 0 here, and like, I don't know, put a bunch of conveyors or whatever, redraw minimap, look, all these got changed, and that's because they're all actually the same room. So if we wanted to put a room here, for example, like in between these two rooms, we'd have to change the room number. So we do that in this Dungeon Editor window. So first of all, we have to find an unused room. There's an easy way to do that. So we go to group 4 in the world editor. In this case, Spirit's Grave is in group 4. Later dungeons are in group 5. We can see here. It's like group dungeons, like starting from dungeon 6. Group 4 is up to dungeon 5. It's like, yeah. Okay, so if we click on darken used dungeon rooms, we can see, okay, the rooms that are darkened are already used. The rooms which are bright are not. I mean, mostly. These ones are not in the dungeon tab at all, but they are used. Like, you just, when you go to these rooms, you just go to somewhere on this map. There's no dungeon layout for them. In any case, it's obvious that these rooms are not used. All these rooms are free for us to use. So let's just use this room. Room is 40E. In this case, we'll ignore the high digit and we'll just use 0E. So, change this to, okay, click here, change this to 0E. Alright, and we've now, actually, let's reload this because we've modified the rooms. Modified the look of the rooms. Okay. Now we can see this room is different. We can modify this independently from all the other rooms. It's no longer a copy. Yeah. We can modify this and it'll be different. And okay, so let's go through the fields here. So, this is general dungeon data and this is per room. This minimap data is per room. Let's go over this first. So we've got group, it's either 4 or 5. So we change this to 5, and all of a sudden, all the rooms changed, and that's because it's loading from a different sort of set of rooms. So this is either 4 or 5, and for dungeon 1 to 4, this is 4. For dungeons 1 to 5, this is 4. From dungeon 6 onwards, it's 5, as we discussed earlier. We just keep this as 4. Mole Master Desk room. Yep. Where it's Mole Master sends you, that's room 2, 4 over here. 4. These floor names. If this is 3, then this just affects the way the floor is named on the minimap. And this affects what floors on the map are unlocked when you get the compass. I don't know why they need this field at all, and why they can't just calculate it automatically. But anyway. So this is you need to think of this like binary. So like use a calculator to convert binary to hexadecimal. For example, this is 3, so that means bits. Sorry, this is 3, so bits 0 and 1 are set, which means you'll unlock floors 0 and 1. If it's 5, then floors 0 and 2 will be unlocked because bits 0 and 2 are set. You can use the hex editor to determine what binary values they correspond to. Like, I'm really used to using hexadecimal, so I don't really need to do that. But yeah. You can also add floors, add floor above. We just got a new floor. Everything defaults to room 0. This is annoying, so let's undo it. I need a rectangle fill or something. Okay. Alright, so this has 2 floors now. We can do whatever we want on this floor. You can even delete a floor if we want. Let's not delete this because this is the whole dungeon, but let's delete the upper floor we just made. Okay. And now for per room data. Now, obviously, up, right, down, left, this is just stuff for the minimap. Like, from this room, you can move right, down, or left, and it'll indicate this on the minimap. If key is checked, then that means you can get a key in this room. In this case, this is the boss key. If chest is checked, then there's a chest in the room, and that'll show you that on the map that there's something here. By the way, key, I think all this key checkbox does is it plays the compass chime when you enter the room. I think that's all it does. Boss, oh yeah, boss, this shows you a boss icon on the minimap, so that's here. You have this checked. And dark, this isn't like a dungeon thing. It's not really a dungeon thing, but it's used in rooms like rooms like this. Okay, dungeon 14 over here. Open that in the dungeon editor. Yeah. It has this dark bit set. And all this does is make the room dark. It doesn't actually allow you to lighten the room. In order to do that, this room, I think this has like, yeah, this has an object called darkroom handler. Some documentation here about that. So yeah, that's what the darkroom bit does. Just makes this dark. And one more thing to note about dungeon editing. It's not really related to this dungeon editor specifically, but you're going to want to notice that. Okay, so in the dungeon editor, okay, group is 4, right? That means, generally that means that all rooms start with digit 4. 420, etc. Yada yada. Let me go here. This is 610. Why is that? So let's get a broader overview of this. So in this world view, we can view all the dungeon rooms in a sort of in the order of their room indices. So these are all the 4s, right? All the 4 rooms. These are all the 5 rooms. This is like dungeons 6 and up. These are all the 6 rooms. Oops. These are all the 6 rooms, and obviously this is repeating, right? This is the same as the 4 rooms. Now, this is, I don't know why they do this, but for some reason rooms in group 4 are used for most dungeon rooms, but group 6 is used for side-scrolling rooms. So, like rooms like this. If we go to the group 4 version of this room, it's the same, except the warp is missing. There's no warp here. Go to 6, here's the warp. Like, they share 99% of their data, except they don't share their warp data. I don't know why it's done like this, or why they even exist in the first place. But that's the way it is. So in my dungeon editor, I automatically programmed it to select the group 6 version of the room if it's a side-scrolling room, Otherwise, it'll select the group 4 version of the room. The only reason for that is because the warps only work properly in those specific versions of the room. And so, like, for example, in this case, the side-scrolling room, that goes to 610. Like, all the warps are like this. They go to the group 6 version of the room. That's just the way the game is made. I don't know why it's made like this, but that's the way it is. So yeah, I just made the editor around that, because that's the way they made it. Okay, so that video turned out to be a bit longer than I expected, but I hope you found it helpful. The next video is going to be on scripting. I've been getting a lot of requests about learning how to script, how to make custom events. They're going to be able to do things like spawn chests when you kill a certain number of enemies, or things like that. That's going to be my next video. Anyway, hope you found that helpful.